welcome. We're going to be talking about conservation of biodiversity today, and I'll break this into two parts. So when we're looking at biodiversity on Earth, we know that, we're losing it rapidly. We're, in this sixth mass extinction, and a number of species are threatened with extinction. So great article. I'm not assigning it, but definitely from the May 25th, 2009 issue of the New Yorker. Elizabeth Colbert, who wrote the book, The Sixth Extinction, has kind of a summary or short version in this issue. The case is well established. If you look here at the X and Y, we've got x-axis, time, years down there on the X, and then on the Y-axis, we've got extinctions as a percentage of the IUCN red list for evaluated species. And you can see in the last couple hundred years, the trend with extinctions has been significantly upward. So we see it in the media, lots of stories around us. And it's not just loss of species, but it's also loss of genetic diversity within species. And so when we talk about genetic diversity, we're talking about variation that we see in phenotypes. So, here's a bivalve coquina, Donax variabilis, and you can see genetic diversity right there in the shells. If you're on the East Coast, anywhere in the Carolinas, all the way down through Florida, you find these on the beach, and they exhibit a wide variety of phenotypes in the shell pattern. When you lose genetic diversity, in the case of this Aruba Island rattlesnake, of course, we talked about this, we fall into a bottleneck situation. The Aruba Island rattlesnake exists on Aruba and nowhere else in the world. And, the few individuals that are there are suffering from a bit of inbreeding depression. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Similarly, again, we looked at honey creepers in Hawaii in one of the videos that we watched a couple weeks ago. And you see distribution in light green in the 1800s, and then now in the dark green. So dramatic range reduction for this particular Hawaiian honey creeper, but it's true of all the honey creepers. Hawaiian crow, over time, the wild bird population of Hawaiian crows has gone completely down, and we still have a number of Hawaiian crows in captivity as people's pets, but not so much in the wild. And so we know inbreeding depression, is, basically a change in the selective fitness of an organism because, of close proximity, breeding with close family members, cousins, and the like. And so in this case with this chickadee, the number of eggs that fail to hatch goes up as the inbreeding coefficient also goes up. Survivorship in wild tamarins decreases the more inbred they are. And we talked about this earlier in the course, but just circling back to it, the idea that our food supplies, more and more and more are less diverse and more homogeneous than they used to be. Okay, so the idea of native species that are indigenous to a particular area, they live there, they evolved there, and they are uniquely adapted for that particular climate and biome and region. So we have indigenous or native species, and then we have introduced species. And these occur in an area where they're not native. They're brought there either accidentally or on purpose. Now, invasive species are different. They're introduced, but there are two distinctions that you can make with introduced species. They can be introduced and not invasive, as in the case of the European honeybee. It's not, the honeybees that we have in North America are introduced. They're from Europe originally, and they've been here with us for the last few hundred years, but they're not invasive. They're not dramatically altering the natural habitat, and they're not crowding out native pollinators. Invasive species, they're defined as they're introduced. They're not necessarily native to the area, so they've been recently brought to a new ecosystem or new habitat, but now they are crowding out the native species that occupy the niche that they are filling. And so they can be plants, animals, really anything, but invasive species can be problematic. As in the case of the zebra mussel, it's a non-native species in North America, but it's become well established, and it tends to outcompete other mussels, and also just reproduce really rapidly in the absence of natural predators, and clog intake pipes for water treatment plants or power plants. Okay, so categories of endangerment. When you're a species, any species, and your population numbers are trending downward, there's sort of levels of danger that a species goes through. So least concern is kind of at the bottom there, but those are species that are widespread and abundant, and there's no noticeable change in population trends. And then near threatened, so I'm going from the bottom up. Near threatened species are species that are declining in number, though still relatively abundant. And then you get to threatened, which, those species are trending downward in their population size rapidly, and they may be extirpated in local populations, and their range, like in the case of the iwi in Hawaii, range may be dramatically reduced in a short time. And then, of course, finally, extinction is, no species, no members of a species in existence. And that includes, captive species as well. So this is kind of what it looks like. Many species are not evaluated or data deficient. There's just not enough information on those to really know what's happening. And then you sort of progress from left to right here through the green, yellow, orange, red, and extinct, and totally extinct. Extinct in the wild, but captive species, captive members still exist in zoos and private collections, and maybe breeding facilities that are trying to restore them, and then fully extinct. So critically endangered, very few individuals left in the wild. Okay, the IUCN keeps a red list of all species, and I'm just going to use just a few minutes. The IUCN is an international body that monitors populations, and they look at species abundance. And you can see just generally in the number of slides that I'm going to kind of click through here rapidly that for the vast majority of species on Earth, or large groupings of species, their trends for those are downward. We hear in North America, we have extinct species and critically endangered. So 303 species critically endangered currently, and 261 extinct species. You look in South America, 659 higher biodiversity, 33 extinct. Okay, so, globally, birds, mammals, amphibians all have some, proportion of their total makeup that is threatened with extinction. You can break it down further: crayfish, plants, mollusks, odonata, the dragonflies also have individuals threatened with extinction. 16 species of that are depicted in the film Finding Nemo are threatened. If you look at all birds, portion of those birds are threatened with extinction. Seabirds have a number of critically endangered species. Okay, this is total species on Earth with, some 2% currently extinct, and then 7% threatened with extinction. Birds in Kuwait that are in trouble. Total number of marine fish species. The blue, yellow, orange, and red are those that are trending downward and, at risk of becoming extinct. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and then in our next video, we'll look at the causes of extinction and declines in populations, and the causes can be summed up by this acronym HIPCO: habitat loss, invasive species, pollution, climate change, and being over-harvested. So check part 2 for more.